Just real quick, this video is not sponsored, but since it features Goldenear products, I have to once again give a shout out to my friends at eCoustics.com who were able to hook me up with Goldenear in the first place. So if you're like me and want to keep up on all the latest news about tech, gadgets, wearables, home theater, and audio, bookmark eCoustics.com on your web browser to stay in the know. Okay, my friends, this project was a doozy to say the least. Just to quickly recap the past few months, to pull off the best case scenario in my not so ideal living room, I thought I'd want a passive soundbar that fits nicely below the TV. Along came the Super Cinema 3D Array XL from Goldenear. I reviewed it, it was awesome, but in the end, it proved to be a bit in the way when it came to holidays and decorating the mantle above the fireplace, so that idea was scrapped and I sent it back. I also reviewed the small but mighty Force Field 30 subwoofer, also from Goldenear. And as I film this, it is still in the corner of the living room, providing some killer low frequencies throughout. But the journey continued to find a solution to get a smaller, unobtrusive, virtually invisible system that was still powerful enough to get some incredible sound in my living room. So, on to the new idea, in-ceiling speakers. Virtually invisible, out of the way of any holiday decorations, and most importantly, wife approved, given that you can't really notice them unless you are specifically looking up. And since I really liked the sound and tech inside of Goldenear's products, of course I requested their flagship HTR-7000 in-ceiling speakers. A massive 12 inches in diameter, perfect for use as LCR speakers since they are already angled at 30 degrees inside its housing, with patented high-velocity folded ribbon AMT tweeters, 8-inch woofers, 4 ohm nominal, a frequency response from 40 Hz to 25 kHz, and an astounding power handling of up to 300 watts. So I wanted 3 HTR-8000s installed as my front LCR above the TV. Originally though, I also wanted 2 HTR-8000s in the rear, but because they're angled, to get the sound to hit my listening position directly, I would have to install them way back into the dining room and kitchen area basically. That was immediately vetoed by my wife when I explained this to her. As you can see, the main area of the living room has a raised ceiling height of 10 feet, while the rest of the house has 9-foot ceilings. So my wife was like, if it can stay in this raised area, then that's cool with me. So now I needed some rear in-ceiling speakers that basically shot downward. Enter the Invisa 850s, basically the downward firing equivalent to the HTR-8000, also sporting its proprietary AMT tweeter and 8-inch woofer, also 4 ohm nominal, a frequency response to 40 Hz to 35 kHz, power handling up to 300 watts, but the kicker is that the tweeter can pivot towards the listening position. Perfect. But before cutting any holes, I had to inspect the situation in the attic, and it's a good thing I did. I first measured out where I wanted the front LCR, so made a mark where the center of the speaker would go and pushed a long pin through the drywall. I then went up into the attic, found those pins, which were not easy to find since they're so thin and I had to move all the blown-in insulation around to find them, etc. But once finally found, I took the 12-inch cutout template and found something very disappointing. There were metal drywall brackets in the way of the 12-inch diameter templates. In fact, the center channel speaker in particular, that position basically had a metal bracket going directly through the middle of where I wanted it installed. Meaning, even if I were to go with a smaller speaker size, it still wouldn't work since the metal bracket would still be in the way no matter what. If you know me, you know that in the past I've mentioned the importance of having a center channel because the dialogue is always fixed to the TV, no matter where you sit. Otherwise, if you only have front, left, and right speakers, dialogue and other center channel information shifts to the nearest speaker depending on where you sit. But I guess that's just what I was going to have to deal with in the end since I wasn't going to cut the support brackets because they're supporting something important. That and the front right speaker cutout template was just barely too big and got in the way of another bracket. Well, even though it was very disappointing, I'm glad I double checked instead of cutting holes willy-nilly. So I made some measurements again, sent an email to my Goldenear contact, and told him that I would like to install the HTR-7000s instead. He sent those out, and I reluctantly sent back the HTR-8000s. The HTR-7000s are basically the same, just a bit smaller. They have 7-inch woofers instead of 8, same folded ribbon AMT tweeter, frequency response down to 42 Hz instead of 40, so that's negligible. Power handling up to 250 watts, which is still a lot. And most importantly, a cutout template with a 9-inch diameter instead of a massive 12 inches. But again, before cutting any holes, and while the HTR-7000s were in transit, I wanted to have the speaker wire in place, ready to go. So I went into the attic with a couple spools, plotted out the spots where the speakers would be, and laid out the speaker wire accordingly. Behind this cabinet here, there was already an Ethernet cable coming down this wall and out of this hole here. So I found that Ethernet cable in the attic, drilled a couple holes next to it for the new speaker wire to go into, slowly fished them down while my wife grabbed them and pulled them out of the hole in the wall at the bottom. That may sound like it went smoothly, but it didn't. It never does. There were times where the speaker wire got snagged on something on the way down, so I had to pull it up, fish it back down, then up, then down again, back and forth. Ugh. That, and when I attempted to lay out the last run of speaker wire, I realized the length wasn't going to be long enough. So I had to order just a little bit more. Installing in-ceiling or in-wall speakers is never easy, folks. Just like renovating any part of your house, there's always something that comes up. Always. Just prepare your mind for that so that when those roadblocks do come up, it's not a surprise. One final preparation step I did was add some protective acoustic foam and insulation. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is recommended. Luckily, when I made my DIY acoustic panels for my dedicated theater, I had a few extra pieces of insulation left. I also had a bunch of acoustic foam pieces from way back when I had a music mixing studio in another house years and years ago. You never know when you might need some acoustic foam, so I'm glad I hung on to those pieces from all those years ago. Because even crappy pieces like this are not cheap nowadays. Doing this step does two things. It makes it so when you cut holes in the ceiling, you're not met with a ton of insulation falling out. And it helps with the acoustic properties of the speaker, having that barrier behind it instead of just being open to the air around it. So I first laid down the acoustic foam, laid the extra insulation on top of that, and then piled the attic insulation back over it. Okay, once the HTR-7000s arrived, it was finally time to cut some holes. Even though I did extensive planning beforehand, I'll admit it was still a little nerve-wracking as I took that drywall blade and started to cut. But once I had one hole done, I was committed, and that was honestly the easiest part. The hole was there, the speaker wire was in reach, I connected the wire to the speaker, pushed it up into place, used a Phillips head screwdriver to lock it in place. Just a tip here though, always screw it by hand. You don't want to use a power drill in this step, or you might strip the screw head or end up tightening it too much, which then causes the drywall to bulge out or even crack. You've been warned. All right, now I have two HTR-7000s as my front left and right, and two Invisa 850s as surround left and right. A modest in-ceiling 4.1 speaker system. The brains of the system is a Marantz Cinema 70S, since I needed something slim to fit nicely in the cabinet, but also an AVR that had a full set of pre-outs because the speakers themselves would be powered by the Stark Sound Fiera 8. Yes, ideally, I would use the Fiera 4 external amp since I only have 4 speakers, but the Fiera 8 is all I had in my possession. Use what you got, you know? So even though it was a smaller 4.1 system, I knew that with the Stark amp and the power handling of the Goldenear speakers that it would be a powerful system to say the least. So I fired everything up, made some manual adjustments, and another problem. The HTR-7000 seemed to have a steep roll-off of high frequencies. Dialogue sounded muffled. Even when I was level matching and running pink noise through them, I noticed the high frequencies weren't as pronounced as the rear Invisa 850s. The next day though, they sounded great. So I thought, okay, maybe they just needed to be broken in a little more, maybe something got jostled during shipping and I just need to play audio through them and they'll correct themselves. On day 3 though, the high frequencies were back to being muffled. And that's something I cannot tolerate. I troubleshot many things, performed many tests, but the high frequencies were still lacking. I contacted Goldenear and asked if they had any other tips or troubleshooting steps that I might have missed. The HTR-7000s do have a high frequency adjustment switch on the speakers themselves, and they said to flip that switch back and forth a couple times because maybe it was stuck between the notches. With the front right speaker in particular, when I moved the toggle switch back and forth, I heard a distinct pop, even though the system was completely off. No power was going to the speaker whatsoever. So the fact that it popped definitely concerned me. Sure enough, the high frequencies never came back, and once again, a roadblock was in front of me. I contacted Goldenear once again, told them the unfortunate news, and they sent me 2 replacements of the HTR-7000s while I sent back the lemons. Being this transparent isn't me being malicious or trying to spread the word about Goldenear's subpar products. Quite the opposite, actually. Before writing this script to this video, I asked Goldenear if I could be completely transparent, and they agreed. Stuff like this just happens, folks. I'm definitely not immune, and neither are you that are watching this video. But this is also a testament to Goldenear's customer service because the replacements came much quicker than the original 7000s. So I installed them, and audio bliss, my friends. High frequencies were pronounced with those AMT-style tweeters, and the system was complete, finally. And man, it was powerful. If you have younger kids and you want to watch something as a family but be wowed by incredible audio at the same time, I highly recommend Pixar's Incredibles 1 and 2. Brad Bird is a phenomenal action director and backs it up with very dynamic sound design and big moments of deep LFE extension. The combo of the Cinema 70S, Stark amp, and Goldenear speakers lit up my living room top to bottom, left to right, and everything in between. Because I was dealing with speakers that could handle lots of power, and because they were being powered by an external amp, the loud parts got surprisingly loud without any distortion. It was truly a cinematic experience since the only other place you'd get dynamic shifts like that would be at your local cinema. Now, I want to address a couple elephants in the room. Does it sound like audio is coming from the ceiling though? And how is it not having a center channel? An interesting thing about the brain is that it is so good at adapting. Yes, when you first turn on a TV show or movie, it sounds like the audio is coming from the ceiling. And since my wife and I usually sit a little off-center on the couch, yeah, from my vantage point, it sounds like the dialogue is slightly coming from the right front speaker. But the longer you watch, you notice that your brain compensates. The sound slowly starts to shift downward, and the dialogue starts to shift towards the center. Your brain knows the people talking on the TV is where the sound should be coming from, so it slowly makes that correction the longer you're in that scenario. Brains are cool, right? So yes, even though it is not the most ideal setup, being 4.1, I think it is the best I'm gonna get considering all the roadblocks I had to deal with along the way. But I will say this, if you are thinking of going with a modest in-ceiling setup, no Atmos or anything, if your ceilings allow for it, definitely install a center channel. That should be a given. If that stupid drywall support bracket wasn't in the way, no question I would have 3 HTR-7000s up there. But another thing to take into consideration is this. If you're having a newly constructed house built like we did in 2022, I urge you to make plans for in-wall or in-ceiling speakers. Even if it ends up never happening, you still have construction that takes into account that there may be a speaker in this spot or that spot or over here, etc. When we were going over the blueprints for this house, I had it in my head that I was definitely going to have a passive soundbar on the mantle, or perhaps a Sony HTA9 or something similar, and didn't need in-ceiling speakers. But during that phase, if I had said yes to possible speakers, there would have been workarounds with the construction so that things like drywall brackets weren't in the way, you know? Or maybe even take it a step further and request that speaker wire be installed at various points before drywall goes up, just so it's already there in case you decide to go forward with a killer virtually invisible immersive audio system. It's always easier to do it at that point instead of running into roadblocks like I did after everything was constructed. Learn from my silly mistakes, please. But even with those roadblocks, I am very happy with the end result. And my wife is too. No, she couldn't care less about the audio quality and incredible dynamics, but she is stoked that it's not a soundbar that gets in the way or speakers on the ground that my girls can accidentally run into or trip over, etc. I still have my dedicated testing theater for the big stuff, so I am very fortunate there. But for the family movie nights or just chilling on the couch on a Saturday afternoon, this 4.1 system gives me plenty, especially when I was just listening to the TV speakers before. And there you have it, folks. My journey to having a fantastic, modest setup in that living room over there is complete. This is honestly all I need in this space, and I am such a fan now of Goldenear speakers. And you should be too. Links are in the description below, of course. And also, now it's your turn. What roadblocks have you run into when it comes to upgrading your system or planning a system altogether? Are you possibly building a home sometime soon? Or renovating your current home and thinking about adding some home theater changes along the way? let's start a conversation in the comments below. And with that, this world is crazy as it is already, so it only makes sense to be kind to each other out there. Don't just watch TV and movies, experience them with Goldenear speakers. And of course, always be listening.